is my book, Lizard from the Park, The Boy and the Airplane, The Girl and the Bicycle. And his book, I Ate Poop, A Dung Beetle Story, was the winner of the 2022 Red Clover Book Award. Mark is also the co-author and illustrator of The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes and the creator of the syndicated comic strip Mr. Lowe and Lucky Cow. Mark Pett, thank you so much for joining us today. It is all yours.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm gonna try to start a slideshow here, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, is that showing up okay? Good? Okay.
Yes, it is.
All right, well, good afternoon. My name is Mark Pett, and I am an authorstrator. And I learned the word authorstrator from a young boy who was about 5, who came to one of my very first book events. And at question time, he raised his hand and he asked, "How do you like being an authorstrator?" And I hadn't heard that word before or since, for that matter. And so I paid that young boy the biggest compliment one can give. I purchased the domain name authorstrator.com. So today I'm going to tell you about how I came to write children's books, and we're going to get into a bit of a story. So I am here today because the good children and the librarians of Vermont were kind enough to bestow upon my book, I Eat Poop, a dung beetle story, the Red Clover Award. And so first, to the librarians, you guys are the keepers of the flame. You're the protectors and promoters of story, and your work is so vital in this time, and I'm so grateful for you, so thank you. And to the children of Vermont, thank you so very much for believing in a dung beetle named Dougie. So today I thought I might tell you a story, but this is a story about a story and how it came to exist. And along the way, I'll tell you a bit about myself and my life and how I write books and how I get from the blank page to the bookshelves. So to kick off, like many stories, this one begins a long time ago, and this particular story begins with a boy named Mark Pett. Yeah, the story begins with me many years ago. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Salt Lake City, you may be aware, is famous for being the headquarters of the Mormon Church. The vast majority of the people who live in Utah were then Mormon. I, however, was not. So to prevent the inevitable ostracizing, I decided to lie and pretend that I was Mormon. And given that I knew nothing about Mormonism, my lies were rarely successful. So here's an example of a typical exchange. A kid that I just met might say, "What ward do you go to?" A ward, if you're unfamiliar, is a Mormon church. And me, I would say, well, there's one across the street from my house. I guess I go to that one. And the kid would just stare at me and say, "You don't know what ward you go to?" So this was, I clearly wasn't very successful in lying my way through this so that I could fit in. I was not what you would call an alpha male. I was sensitive, not particularly athletic. I did, however, discover that I could draw Snoopy a bit better than the other kids and decided to use this fact to gain their approval. So early on, I resolved that I wanted to be a cartoonist. In fact, at the age of 11, I submitted my very first comic strip to the Salt Lake Tribune. And I very promptly received my very first rejection letter. And in the rejection letter, it informed me that they only accept comic strips from something called a syndicate, which I didn't know what that was. And I later learned that a syndicate is a company that distributes comic strips to newspapers. And actually, a kind of a cool fact, 18 years later, almost to the day, my very first syndicated comic strip appeared in the Salt Lake Tribune. So that's kind of cool. Fast forwarding a bit, I went off to college back east and studied philosophy, which, as it turns out, is an excellent degree to get if you want to be a cartoonist. After college, I went off and I lived in Prague in the Czech Republic, and I walked into a newspaper and they hired me as their editorial cartoonist. So my very first job out of college was as an editorial cartoonist in Prague. Here's an example of one of my cartoons back then. I think we can all agree it's pretty hilarious. It's actually, that's what he's saying is they have a lot of pollution in Prague, especially in the wintertime, because at least at that time, it was mostly heated by coal. And so he is saying, I've taken up smoking so that now from time to time I can breathe through a filter. After living in Prague and doing editorial cartoons for a short time, I expected that when I returned to the United States that I would be greeted as a hero, and that the New York Times would decide that I would be the very first editorial cartoonist they ever hired. That, in fact, did not happen. And so I joined a fledgling organization at that time called Teach for America. And I went down to Mississippi and I taught 6th grade in what was then the poorest county in the United States, in rural Mississippi, and taught there for 2 years. And that experience did a number of things. It gave me an immense appreciation for teachers. And for those of you that work in schools, I admire you and am very grateful for you. And it also gave me a premise for what would then be my very first comic strip, which was called Mr. Lowe. And it was about a naive, idealistic teacher who teaches, in this case, 4th grade, and his students take advantage of him because he's so naive. Here's what the cover of my promo kit looked like. And here's an example of one of the comic strips that I did back then. So he's talking to his friend Abigail, and she says, "So, Mr. Lowe, how was school today?" "Well, let's see. I found corn dogs stuffed in the VCR. A student whited out the math scores in my grade book, and someone cut the leaves off all my plants." And she says, "Wow, that's not nearly as bad as usual." "I know, that's 2 good days in a row." So that gives you an example of, that's kind of what my teaching life was like back then. So after doing Mr. Lowe, I felt like I'd earned my master's degree in cartooning. That's how I considered it. So it was an important experience. Mr. Lowe lasted only about a year before I finally pulled it from syndication. After Mr. Lowe, I did a comic strip called Lucky Cow. It took place in a fast food chain, think like McDonald's in this world. It was a comic strip that lampooned American culture and that sort of thing. So here's an example of a comic strip that I did, and you can see the what the draft of it looks like up above, and down below, one of the teenagers that works there is saying to the other one, "Neil, you don't have to say spoiler alert before you read the obituaries." So that's an example. And I would be remiss if I didn't brag a little bit. I lived in Mississippi. I went back to Mississippi and lived there for a while. And I worked with about 150 high school students in Mississippi, and we created the world's largest comic strip. It is in the Guinness Book of World Records. And you can see it next to, we actually had to, this was before drones, so we had to go up, actually to take this photo, I went up in a hot air balloon to take this photo. And you can see those school buses there for scale, which is a lovely touch. And this did appear in the Guinness Book of World Records, so that was kind of a neat thing. And I'm grateful to the students of Gentry High School in Indianola, Mississippi, for helping me with that. So after doing Lucky Cow, I did that for about 5 years, every single day, no breaks, 7 days a week for 5 years. I felt like I'd earned my PhD in cartooning at that point. So, and there, after doing the comic strip, a daily comic strip was a really wonderful experience for someone who wanted to learn how to write and draw as well. There's a famous quote by Bill Watterson. He said, "I learned to write so that I could draw for a living." And that's what I felt like I'd done. So 4 things I learned creating a daily comic strip. It was a really important experience for me. The first thing is the proverbial 10,000 hours we hear about that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in Outliers, that you cannot truly master something until you've done it for 10,000 hours. So I had to produce 365 comic strips per year, no vacation, and I produced over 2,000 comic strips. Doing that, I had to write each one, sketch it, edit it, finalize it, and that was a really important experience to really feel like I'd mastered something. After that, another thing I learned, there's a quote from Somerset Maugham in the book that Stephen Pressfield quotes in the book The War of Art. Someone asked him if he wrote on a schedule or only when struck by inspiration. "I write only when inspiration strikes," he replied. "Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 o'clock sharp." And what that means to me is that doing that daily comic strip taught me how to be a professional, how to be a pro, you don't just write when you feel like it. You show up every day, you get your butt in the chair, and you sit down and you write. And that was a really important thing for me to learn. The next thing I learned about is that there is no perfection in the creative process. That for me, creating a daily comic strip was a lot like baseball. You don't hit a home run every single time at bat. You just hope to have a good batting average over time. And for me, growing up as a kid that really tried to please people, I learned to draw. I hung on drawing because it gave me the opportunity to please my peers and please the adults around me. And as someone who did that, I really struggled with perfectionism. I really thought everything had to be perfect before I could show it to anybody or before I could get it out there into the world. And producing a daily comic strip 365 days a year, that is not a luxury that is afforded to you. So I had to be comfortable with mediocrity. I had to produce things and put them out into the world that weren't ready yet. They were, less than fully baked. So that was a really important experience for me to learn that oftentimes we don't let, the famous quote, we don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, so. And the next thing I learned is that there is no substitution for publication. There's a great quote by Steve Jobs who says, "Real artists ship." And to me, that means that being an artist is about communicating. It's about getting your work out there into the world. It's about producing and showing people. And it can mean publication doesn't necessarily mean a book or being in a newspaper or a magazine or whatever. It can be, showing a poem to a friend. It can mean putting something in a literary magazine or just posting something on the internet. It could be publication. So that was really important. There are 2 reasons I finally, after doing a comic strip, I got into making children's books and writing picture books. And there are 2 main reasons I got into this. One of them is my daughter, Millie, and the other one is my daughter, Cleo. After having 2 kids of my own, I realized, a picture book was a lot like a really long Sunday comic strip. So I started making books for them. And these are some of the first books I wrote. I tend to write stories that I think I would have wanted to read as a kid. The first book I wrote was, as I mentioned earlier, I struggled with perfectionism. So one of the first books I wrote was The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes, which is about a girl who is perfect, who has never in the history of her life made a mistake. And she's famous in her town for never having made a mistake. And over time, we see how that affects her life, that it actually cramps her, that it keeps her from trying new things and exploring things and having fun. And so I wrote that book mostly as a story for myself as a boy, because I knew that that's a story I would have loved to have heard. I Eat Poop is the same thing. Um, I Eat Poop is a story of a dung beetle who is ashamed because he eats poop, and so he has to hide his lunch from the other bugs at school. And that, for when I wrote that, I really thought of it as a book that young Mark Pett really needed to read. So that's why I wrote that book. And all of my books tend to be that way. And I just trust that there is a kid out there who probably needs to read the same story. So on that note, let's go to how I get from the blank page to the bookshelves. And I'm going to walk you through the process of how I just get from creating a book from scratch all the way to the bookshelf. Now, I Eat Poop is an unusual story for me. Because it began many years ago. It wasn't something that I just wrote recently. It started as a concept I thought of many years ago. So the first step, of course, of writing is the brainstorm and writing process. When I write, I tend to write, sometimes I write with words, all words. Sometimes I write with pictures. In this case, this is an example of my notebook. I was considering a story about a girl and a rhinoceros. This story never got made, but sometimes I like to just write in pictures and see what grabs me. And oftentimes, though, I usually write with words and pictures. This is another example of one of my notebooks. I was exploring a story about a possum who gets adopted by turtles. And I'm still would like to write this one day. We'll see if it gets out there. But so here are some thoughts. So very early on, many years ago, I came up with a book idea that was originally called I Eat Poop. And it was about a dung beetle. Well, at least partly about a dung beetle. It was also about an elephant who drinks with his nose. It was also about a butterfly who tastes food with her feet. And the idea was that it just went through a lot of different animals and the different interesting facts about them. Not much of a plot to it, but this book never got made. I decided there just wasn't enough here. But I got hung up on this cover story, the I Eat Poop, this dung beetle who eats poop. And I thought, what would it be like if you were a dung beetle and that was not something you were proud of? What if it was something you had shame about, that you wanted to hide? And what would that be like for that dung beetle? So early on, this was a very early sketch of the book. I Eat Poop. This was the earliest sketch that I have of it. And the story actually begins much in the same way that the book itself starts. You can see the dung beetle waking up. I started my day last Tuesday, like most days. I sat down for breakfast with my parents. As usual, my baby brother was making a mess. And you can see he's eating his poopos. And I helped my mom make my favorite lunch, a poop sandwich with the crust cut off. So the story starts, it's very similar to the other one, but I couldn't quite figure out where the story was going to go. I knew that I wanted him to be, he wished he were a different kind of bug. Maybe he pretends to be just a regular old ground beetle. But I couldn't figure out where the story went. Perhaps a giant cow comes along and poops on the school and he saves the day. That was the best idea I came up with. Fortunately, I had the wisdom to know that was a terrible idea. I Eat Poop, I really liked the title because it was a bit of a misdirection. You might you pick it up thinking maybe it's about one thing. It's about poop jokes and gross out humor. And I didn't mind a good, poop pun here and there. I didn't mind that, but I didn't want it to be a gross book. I didn't want you to pick it up and be like, ooh, feeling a little sick to your stomach after reading it. And I also knew that it was a very gimmicky concept and a very gimmicky title. And I knew that if this story was going to be any good, it had to have a story that really mattered, you know, that really said something. If I was going to use that title in this concept, I knew I really had to hit it out of the park. So wisely, fortunately, I put it in my shelf and just kept it there for about 10 years. And it just stayed there. And I always thought, you know, I think I'd like to get it out someday, but I don't know when. And then I went to a Broadway show. I went to a show called Dear Evan Hansen. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Some of you maybe have, and some of you probably haven't. But if you haven't, I strongly recommend it. It's out in a movie form, but the Broadway show is what struck me especially. So I went to see this Broadway show. And without giving anything away, it's about a teenage boy who creates a lie that's so big it takes over his life and the lives of others. And after seeing this, the first thing I thought about was the dung beetle and how I wanted to. Well, I thought I want to make a musical also because I was so inspired by this musical. I wanted to make a musical, and I wanted it to be. I wanted to do this story about the dung beetle, and suddenly I knew kind of what needed to happen with him, and how. And I didn't quite know how it was going to get resolved, but I had like some tingling in my brain. You know, sparks were starting to fly, and I sat down and just started working out the story and figuring it out. And I started making drawings. And at first, I thought it would be fun to make little watercolor drops and make those into bugs. I was trying to figure out how to draw. I'd never really drawn bugs before. That wasn't a thing I'd ever done. None of my books have ever been about bugs. When I looked at my original sketches, I wasn't particularly taken with them. So I had to figure out what these bugs looked like. So my first attempts were these watercolor drops that I turned into bugs. And you can see what some of them looked like. You know, they were cute, but they didn't do a lot for me. So I had to figure out where to go from there. I ended up hiring a friend of mine named Mark Walton, who was a storyboard artist for Disney. I hired him to help me kind of to work on what the bugs might look like because I'd never really drawn bugs before, and it was actually very helpful. He, by the way, is if you've ever seen the movie Bolt, about the dog and the hamster and the cat. Anyway, he's the voice of the hamster in that movie, so it was kind of fun. But so after kind of doing a lot of designing and figuring out what the characters looked like, it was time to start the next step 2 of a book. I start thumbnailing it. Thumbnailing often looks like this, which looks just like a bunch of scribbles. And but the idea is they're just for me. They're just for me to work out the pacing of the story. You know, one of the jobs of an illustrator is to guide the reader's eye. You know, I'm always thinking about how's the reader's eye moving across the page, because that's I'm always worried about. I'm always thinking about timing. You know, what's the about visual timing, about the pace of the text, things like that. So I work all of that out with thumbnails, and they start with scribbles, and they gradually get more involved. You can see here what some of the early things looked like. I know they're very small on your screen, and I apologize for that, but you can see that the characters are starting to come together in my drawings. And here are some more thumbnails, and I'm just kind of working out what the story is going to start to look like as it comes together. And here's a few more thumbnails as well. So I know there's not a lot to see there, but it's one of the really fun parts of story making for me, is that watching it all come together and working out the pacing and the the timing and imagining the reader's eye working its way across the page. So the next step after that is to do a storyboard. After doing the thumbnails, I now have to put together a story that I can communicate to another person that stands on its own, so that I don't actually sit here and explain what the story is, but a reader can pick it up and figure it out for themselves. And so this is what the very first draft of I Eat Poop looked like. And I sent this off to my agent to see what my agent thought of it. So you can see Tuesday began like most days. That's very much like that very first draft 10 years earlier. I sat down for breakfast with my parents. As usual, my baby brother was making a mess. You can see very similar to the very first draft. I helped my mom make my favorite lunch, a poop sandwich with the crust cut off, and I packed up my backpack for school. When I got to school, just like I do every day, I hid my lunch under the big rock behind the monkey bars where no one would see it. It's hard being the only dung beetle in the entire school. I can't eat lunch with the other kids. I have to sneak snacks wherever I can. And I have to tell everyone I'm really just a regular old ground beetle. It's a lot of work keeping my secret, but I clearly don't have a choice. I mean, look how they treat Sammy the stink bug. If everyone found out I eat poop, I'd be an outcast. So you can see the story at this point, the beginning was very similar to what it was 10 years earlier. So then after that, once I get the draft together, we call it a dummy of the book. It's time to pitch it. And I pitch it first to my agent. So this is the pitch. So I'll pitch the story to my agent, see if my agent thinks it's a good idea. And once if she thinks this is a good idea and she thinks it's ready to be made into a book, then we'll make a dummy. This is the next step, step 5. So here's what the original dummy looked like. The original Dougie, the dung beetle, looked like this. It didn't have the subtitle, Dung Beetle Story. That was my editor's idea once the book was made. And I think it was a wise idea. I didn't like it. I didn't want the subtitle because I thought I wanted it to stand on its own, let the reader do the work. But I think it was a wise choice. So originally I wanted to do it in the illustrations in watercolor and pencil. Here's another drawing, another original drawing, where it says, "Dad says I come from a long line of proud dung beetles. He says we help process waste and make the earth more inhabitable. All I know is I go through more mouthwash than any kid in middle school should. Don't get me wrong, I love poop. As Dad says, it's in my genes. But if I had one wish, I'd make myself a wasp, or better yet, a dragonfly. They are by far the coolest bugs in school." So this is what the original dummy looked like that I made with the help of my agent. And then once we got the dummy completed, it was time to share it with publishers. And that's step 6, share it with publishers. And after sharing with the publishers, you just, sit back and hope everything's okay. Trust that it'll turn out all right. And it happened that I was in New York, and this was like just right before the pandemic. So we were still like meeting people in person. And I went to New York and went around town meeting with some different editors. And I met with Connie Sue at Macmillan Roaring Brook. And right away, I knew she was the right fit because, she's Asian, and she told me that I could tell she got the story immediately. She said, "When I was a kid, I was the kid with the stinky lunch." And to her, that really resonated. And I love that. So right away, I think I knew she was the right editor for the book. And so we sold the book to Macmillan, Roaring Brook, and went from there. Step 7 is to listen, hear what everybody has to say, hear what my editor has to say, hear what my art director has to say, and show it to some kids and see what the kids think of the story and see what resonates with them. And they tell me their vision, and they tell me what they think. And it's a wonderful part of the process. I really love working with other. I think in my essence, I'm really a collaborator, which makes being an author-strator a little challenging, because as an author-strator, I do the drawing, I do the writing, and there's not a lot of opportunity for collaboration. So one of the things I love about working with editors and art directors at publishing houses is the opportunity to collaborate, at least in some sense. So step 8 after that is we get to work. We work with my editor, I work with the art director, and we have to go back and forth on many drafts. I listen to, I have this vision that I'm trying to communicate. That's how this stuff works. And my editor's job is to help me communicate that vision. And she tells me where I'm succeeding and where I'm failing. And sometimes I resist, and sometimes she pushes back. And very fortunately, I have an editor who knows what she's doing, and she doesn't back down. One thing I've learned in making books is that my editor is never wrong. She might not have the right answer to a problem, but she's never wrong that there is a problem. So that's one thing I've learned in making books. It's been a humble realization, but it's been a helpful principle to guide me, is to just, if my editor sees something, then I need to figure it out. It might take some time to figure out what the essence of the problem is, but there is a problem there. For instance, it was her idea to do the subtitle, A Dung Beetle Story, and I resisted. I didn't like the subtitle. I thought it should stand on its own, but she was right about that, that it needed just a little something, not a lot, just a little something to kind of invite the reader in, to kind of, the title itself could be a little off-putting. I eat poop, for many people, that can be an off-putting title. So that was helpful in hearing that there's, in kind of cracking the door open a little bit, inviting somebody in, letting them know this is about a creature who, this is about what a dung beetle might be going through if they lived in this world. So I've been very fortunate to have an amazing editor who's been able to help me make this story as strong as possible. In talking to the award committee earlier, someone mentioned that they really enjoyed the yearbook pages, and that was actually one of my editor's ideas as well. Like she really encouraged me to have some back matter that gave facts about dung beetles, and I resisted it. I was like, I don't want back matter, because it's going to get in the way of the story. It'll, detract from the essence of the story, and I wanted any facts to be kind of integrated into the book. But she's like, no, we need something. So let's figure out how to solve this. And she was right that it needed a little something. And I think but again, she was right that there was a problem. She wasn't necessarily right in the solution, but she was right in that there was a problem. And so the solution we came up with was doing the yearbook pages that gave some additional facts about bugs, but we did it in a way that really felt integrated with the story, I think. So I was grateful to her for that. So the next step after all that work is to do the final art. And this is some of the fun part as well. Initially, I tried doing them as watercolors and pencils, like I'd mentioned earlier. But in some of the more complicated scenes, it just ended up looking muddy. And some of the early test runs I did, they just kind of looked it just didn't work, and they were very muddy and complicated. So I soon ruled that out and went with decided to do the book digitally. And so these are what this is what this is the first spread of the book. Tuesday began like most days, which is very similar to that original story idea many years before. And then here's another spread. It's hard being the only dung beetle in the entire school. I can't eat lunch with the other kids. I have to sneak snacks at recess. And I have to tell everyone I'm just a regular old ground beetle. It's a lot of work keeping my secret, but I just don't have a choice. Look how they treat Sammy Stinkbug. If everyone found out I ate poop, I'd be an outcast. And then this spread here, I think, was nice. This was different, of course, than that early watercolor where they look at pictures on the wall. It's the same text, though, pretty much. And then we got to include some family scenes, which was kind of fun, of what some of his ancestors might have looked like. And then here's another spread. And this was after he had gotten in good with the popular bugs, and they invited him to sit at his lunch table. But of course, he couldn't eat his lunch because he's ashamed and he has to hide it. So by afternoon recess, my abdomen was really growling. I snuck away to find my lunch sack under the big pebble behind the monkey bars. As I opened the sack, I heard a voice. What's that? It was Nick Gnat, the pestiest bug in school. I don't know, I lied. I just found it under this pebble. So you can see where the story really kind of comes together. And then this is the climax, of course, of the story. When he finally admits that he loves to eat poop. And of course, the other bugs react predictably. They tell him how gross it is, how disgusting it is, and his greatest fear is realized. Which is one of the things I'm glad we included in this book, is that his greatest fear is realized, because kids are smart. They're constantly mapping the kids around them, the adults around them, the people around them. They know how people are going to react, and he's not wrong. They think it's disgusting that he eats poop. So I like that the story went that direction, instead of they all just say, oh, that's fine. We love you for being who you are, because that's not often how, kids know how the other kids are going to respond, and they respond as he predicts. But after that, a second grader, praying mantis, spoke up. So my mom ate my dad. And that's when the bugs realize that, of course, well, they're all weird. They all have weird things. They, bugs especially. One of the fun things was researching all the different bugs for this story and how wonderfully weird they are. There's so many bizarre things about bugs, and that was terrific to think about. So, and of course, here's the yearbook page. These were really fun to do. And I've been actually thinking about writing more bug stories, because they're so much fun to do. But you can see some of the different bug facts. This is where we got into the, that back matter. And this was it ended up being one of my favorite parts of the book, and certainly probably the most fun part to draw and come up with. So I'm really grateful to my editor for pushing me on that. And then step 10, we finally have the book itself. The process of creating a book, it often takes years. In this case, it took more than a decade, of course, but just even the production of the book takes, from the time we sold, that I wrote the book to the time it comes out in print was about 2 years. So it's a very long process, but it's a really worthwhile process. And of course, then it has only just begun. It's essentially you're at base camp of Mount Everest, right? Like you feel like you've accomplished this big thing, but of course, that's just getting to base camp. Now, getting it out into the world, especially with the help of librarians and booksellers, and getting it into the hands of children, that's the big challenge. So awards like the Red Clover Award make a big difference. They really help highlight books that for parents and teachers and other librarians to find. They really help. So I'm grateful to you for this award and for giving Dougie that award, because I think it will help that many more children find him. And hopefully it's a book that they'll need to hear, as it would have been for me as a kid. I know that. And it all comes down to, my favorite character in the book is Herman Housefly, Dougie's best friend as a kid. And his T-shirt, I think, sums up the message of the book. If you can see it, I'll let you read it. If not, it says "Own your," and then it has poop on his shirt. And he's unashamed about his poop eating, because he's a housefly, and he eats poop as well. So that's something he and Dougie bonded about early on in life. But he's the one who's unashamed about it. And so I think we'll leave it there with Herman giving us the theme of the book, because that's what I Eat Poop is. It's a celebration of weirdness, of uniqueness, of difference. It's about owning who you are. It's about owning what makes you you, from your quirky preferences to your identity, whether it's cultural or personal. I think that's what it's really about. And so once again, I want to thank the committee. I want to thank the librarians of Vermont and the wise children of Vermont for bestowing this award upon I Eat Poop. I really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And it's been great meeting you all and talking to you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we do have some questions for you if you have time to answer some questions.
Absolutely. Be happy to.
Go back. Okay, so the first one goes back to your presentation, asking about the world record comic strip, which was super cool. So they just wanted to know the legit, like, was it painted? How did you create it?
That's a great question. It was we used. So I worked with some art students in a high school. They were in Indianola, Mississippi, and they were working on how to scale up, a small picture up to a slightly larger picture. And they did it by gridding, and then taking those little grids and scaling it up. So I was talking to the art teacher, who happened to be a friend of mine, and I was like, well, what if we did the ultimate scale up? What if we took, a comic strip, which is printed about that big, it's, 6 inches long, a comic strip in a newspaper. And what if we printed it, and made it enormous? So she was fully game, which is amazing. Here, I'll pull up the picture again so we can look at it while we're talking about it. Let's see if I can do this while we're, maybe not. I think I stopped presenting. Well, it doesn't matter. So what we did was we decided to just break this one little comic strip down into, I think it was 1,300 pieces. Little tiny pieces, and each of those pieces was made into a sheet of poster paper. Your typical poster paper that you get at the dollar store. We got the local dollar store there to donate like 1,300 pieces of poster board. And then they just used black poster paint. And each child was responsible for, there was a lot of blank ones, so those were easy. But outside of that, we took each poster board and gridded that down even more. And then they were responsible for painting them. And the real chore was keeping track of them all. So we had to come up with this very intricate, system to keep track of where each one went. It was so in that sense, it was also an exercise in organization and filing and whatever. So there are a lot of wonderful pictures of the kids painting the pictures and hanging them up to dry and filing them and all
sure
told.
they were excited to be involved in it.
Oh yeah, and it was really great. It was. As I mentioned, it was really difficult to take a picture. We weren't sure how to do it. We considered it, a drone would have been wonderful. I wish we'd had them back then, but we tried a camera attached to a weather balloon. That didn't work. The editor of the local paper flew over in a crop duster and took pictures for the newspaper. So that was good. And then I happened to know a guy with a hot air balloon. So one student, we only could take 2 people besides the pilot up in the hot air balloon. So I went up and then one of the students went up and we took pictures. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a bunch more questions. We'll see if we can get through them. So have your comic strips ever been collected into a published book, or where's a place?
Yes, both Mr. Lowe I published through an education publisher called Cottonwood Press, and I believe it's out of print. I'm quite sure it's out of print. But it was a small publisher out of Colorado that I approached about doing a collection, and they were happy to do so, and we sold out the run, which was good, but and it was, I thought mostly some teachers would appreciate it because it was really about teaching and my experience doing that. Lucky Cow was also printed in a collection by Andrews McMeel. It was syndicated by Universal Press Syndicate, which is also the parent company is Andrews McMeel. So they often are the ones who publish those cartoon collections. So yeah. And it's both of them are in reruns online on gocomics.com. So if you're interested, go to gocomics.com and you'll find them in reruns. So
awesome, thanks. Another question about cartooning. Can you speak more to your connection between your major in philosophy and writing comic strips?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I grew up, my favorite comic strip was easily Calvin and Hobbes, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. In those days, there were 3 great, in my view, there were the 3 great comic strips were Calvin and Hobbes, one called Bloom County, which you don't see very often anymore because it's kind of dated if you read it now, and The Far Side by Gary Larson. But Calvin and Hobbes to me was like wonderful. And of course, it's named after 2 philosophers, John Calvin and Thomas Hobbes. So, and I think it was when I was in high school that I realized I loved small classes where we just discuss things and philosophy. I took a philosophy class in high school, which I was really grateful for. And I think I just realized that was the kind of thing I loved to do, was just sit around and talk about meaning of life kinds of things. And I realized that's those are the things, a really great comic strip, that's what it deals with, is like the essence of life and timeless truths about life. That's what that's why Calvin and Hobbes is still so relevant today, even though it's hard to make a comic strip that holds up over time. Things are very quickly dated in ways you don't even realize. And that's a comic strip that has managed not to do that, which is a real testament. I tried to do jokes about texting and, in my comic strip, or about other things that were about life at that time. And those ones just, they're kind of cringy when you go back and read them. The ones that hold up are the ones that are really about timeless truths. So philosophy was great preparation for that.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. There are just some comments. Folks would love to read about a possum that gets adopted by turtles. So you got to make that one.
That's another one that I came up with the original story. I lived in this little town called Indianola, Mississippi I lived there for about 10 years after I did the teaching thing. I went back and lived there, and on my way to my studio every day, I would walk along this bayou and saw these turtles that lived on a log in the middle of the bayou, and I was adopting a child of my own at that time, and so as I walked along the bayou, this story emerged, and I would draw the pictures, and it was another one where the story, I love the premise, and I just haven't quite come up with the thing that needs to happen, and I've come up with many versions of it. That's a story that has lived with me for a long time, and I've come up with many versions, and I hope that it will see the light of day. We'll see.
Yeah, I'd be encouraged to keep the idea alive, and also people would love to see I Eat Poop musical or some sort of bug musical.
This is wonderful. Actually, we are working on the musical.
You are?
We are. We've been held up for a long time because of the writer's strike.
Yeah.
In Hollywood, that has thankfully just been resolved.
Yeah.
So we are hopefully back at it, and we have amazing people we're working with. There's no deal inked, so I can't share anything. But anyway, we are trying to make a musical of I Eat Poop. So
incredible.
I'm hoping it actually comes to pass, because that would be, I don't know. I've always loved musicals, and yeah, would love to see it happen. So we'll see.
Let's see. We have there's some other comments in here. I'm gonna try to get a few more questions. People love the ending of I Eat Poop, and also the name there. The as you were talking about with the name of it, that was also when the committee was talking about putting it on the list initially. That was like a big conversation of like, is this too much to have to be on the list?
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine it would be.
But then
I appreciate the courage it took to put that on the list. So thank you to the committee for overcoming your fears.
And then people just say that the students and the kids that they've shared it with just connected with it. They love all the bug facts, and that even like older kids, like 5th and 6th graders, have loved like the book as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah. There's a question about how your daughters felt about the book.
My daughters have loved the book. I shared early drafts with their classes. I visited both of their classes and shared early drafts. So that, because I wanted to test it with an audience, and so I was, I think growing up, it didn't seem like a unusual job for their father to be making books. Although it was always annoying that, like, whenever they went to birthday parties, their friends just got like books of their dads. But I think once they saw, I think by the time they reached like 4th or 5th grade, they realized, okay, this is kind of an interesting job that our dad has, and they liked when I presented to the class and made them feel kind of special. So yeah.
Well, I'm sure I'm missing a few questions here. I apologize to folks who posted all of them, but there's a lot of great comments in here. There was a question about also about a sequel to I Ate Poop. And then I also just wanted to segue into like if there's any other projects that you're working on besides music, anything that you want to like tell us about that's in the works.
I am, what I've been trying to do is there is a book idea I've been working on that is I like to think of it as a companion book to I Eat Poop because rather than a sequel, because there's so many bugs in that world that you could just follow off, and do a spin-off, I guess you would call it. And I've been working on a story, and it's not quite there yet, but it's been working on a story about a caterpillar who doesn't want to be a butterfly. Is like I read an essay about the process that a caterpillar goes through to become a butterfly, and it's insane. Like they get turned into soup before they just somehow rearrange themselves.
Yeah, it's wild.
And emerge as a butterfly. And so you can imagine that's a terrifying thing, and any caterpillar in their right mind would say, I don't want to do that. And so I've been working on a story about that takes place in the world. It would be there's a bug in the I Eat Poop book called Who's a Butterfly, whose name is what's her name? Blanking on it. Anyway, she's very colorful and is always taking selfies and is very self-involved. Anyway, this story would involve like her younger sibling probably, who so it would be a kind of a spin-off, but and take place in that same world. And
in the I Eat Poop universe.
Yeah, and I really want to develop the whole community of bugs too. And I imagine it taking place maybe in a city, almost like New York or something, called Entomopolis.
Yeah.
And there's all these different, things going on. Maybe, there are bodegas and all kinds of things. Maybe, I think there's a lot the Natural History Museum, and then visit, see the bugs, maybe a bug stuck in amber, and all sorts of.
Yeah.
You can tell I've spent a lot of time in this world.
So that's awesome. We hope to see more of that. That sounds like it could be a bunch of books, and sounds like I was imagining as you're describing it as like an animated series or something too.
Yeah, I think you could definitely do an animated series. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we haven't had an animated bug movie in over 20 years, so
yeah,
it's like A Bug's Life and Ants. So.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you have any last words, but we appreciate you taking time to join us and to answer a bunch of questions.
Well, just how much I honor and appreciate librarians. I think you're on the front lines, and we need you. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. Well, that was awesome. Sorry, my dog is getting a little restless. He wanted to chat in. Hey, buddy. So that was really great. And we're going to give the rest of the time to the committee. So very quickly, I'm going to do a little overview of, or just about the book award, which I'm sure that you are familiar with. But the Red Clover Book Award is designed for children in kindergarten through 4th grade. This Children's Choice Award has been handed out annually since 1997. And each year, the committee members work tirelessly, reading, to read as many books as possible, and then they narrow it down to the 10 amazing books, which, as we know, I Ate Poop is one of the ones from last year, and then now we're going to talk about the books from the 2023-2024 list. So I'm going to give it the rest of the time over to Hannah Feld, who is the committee chair, to introduce the committee and to talk about the list.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to start out by acknowledging everybody who is a part of the Red Clover Committee. Could you just give me a thumbs up if you see my screen? I want to make sure that it's sharing. Great. Awesome. So I have a list of all of our committee members up here because not everyone is going to be presenting with us today because some people are new to the committee and some people weren't able to be here. But I just wanted to acknowledge Abby and Joyce and Valerie and Kara and Natalie and Abby and Tessa and Kate and Leaf for being a part and working so hard on the committee. So what we'll do today is we're going to spend, 5-ish minutes talking about each of the nominated books for this year's list, hoping to save some time at the end so that we can share with you 5 to 8 of our favorite B list books that almost were Red Clover books, and then maybe a couple moments for questions. But if you do have questions during the conversation, you can of course always put them in the chat. So let's see, I'm just going to hand it over to Joyce, who's going to present Me and the Boss first.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I am putting a beautiful link in that Liv had just given me regarding sewing. This is a book called Me and the Boss by Michelle Edwards and illustrated by April Harrison. And I love this book, especially since it has components to doing some hands-on sewing. So I love that the illustrations are done in collage, acrylic, pens, and pencil. And as you can see, our main character, Lee, is admiring his boss, which is his bigger sister right here, Zora. So Zora is taking the lead as they head to the library. And I love how the library is a place where community comes together and we do projects, hands-on projects. So the librarian here says, Mrs. C says, okay, everyone, we're going to do a sewing project. And she kind of specifies that you need to be a certain age group. And right away, Zora steps in and says, my brother's old enough, which I think her assertiveness plays a big part in how Lee is able to participate. So as the demonstration is given, Lee is right there where he's watching and very much involved in the process of learning how to sew. I loved how there was the sense of learning and practicing and giving it a try, knowing that even though you're at a very young age, you can give it a try. Might not be as great as your older sister, but certainly you could take it home and put it in your pocket and come back to it at another time. As they're walking home, I really love the sense that we have older sister Zora, very proud of her creation, where Lee's not so sure. You can see how he's putting it in his pocket, not really wanting to show his parents. This story is lovely because late into the night, we see that Lee is going to practice continually to get the needle to go in and out, to see that he can do good sewing and mending, to the point where he can help his sister. Sister has a stuffed elephant that needs a little bit of fixing. And in the early morning, he goes in and he does that little mending for his sister. And although Zora is not the most verbally approving sister, she says, you, with the big hug. And I love how there is affection and love between these two. And in fact, the title of the book says a story of mending and love. And the ending not only has them exiting, but giving you a sewing project that you certainly can do. So highly recommend this book, and I hope that you'll enjoy it.
Thank you, Joyce. Valerie, you are next to share Bobcat Prowling. You're still muted, Valerie.
Thank you for the reminder. I am Valerie Bong-Jensen, and I am sharing this book with you from Burlington, where on all the Front Porch Forum newsletters, we have been getting notices that, oh, just saw a bobcat run by. Oh, I saw it too. So this is a beautiful work of nonfiction by Maria Gianferrari and illustrated by Bagram Ibatulin. And it puts the reader right in Vermont, right at the end papers, to help show you that this is happening in Vermont. And the illustrations are beautiful watercolor that will look really familiar to Vermont readers, whether you live in a rural area or one that's a little denser. So in this book, we learned that yearling is now being sent off on his own in a life cycle stage to find his own territory. And we learn what he needs to do. We see him overcoming challenges of finding prey. The author and illustrator don't shy away from the fact that this is an apex predator looking for things to eat and being chased by other predators, but it's very matter of fact and easily handled. Children in the book notice yearling's tracks. They notice that he's going through their backyards at times, and even camping out right near where yearling himself is sleeping. So the back matter in the book presents ways to move like a bobcat that children might enjoy doing with some movement of their own. It presents what the bobcat eats and calls it what's on the menu for a bobcat. And it could lead to all kinds of great discussions about what is territory? What do the animals need for their territory? What do we as people consider our territory? And how do the two intersect? You might have kids looking out the windows and keeping track of the animals that they see in the schoolyard or at home in their backyard, keeping tallies. And you might even start to think about ways that people and animals can coexist. For example, some companion books raise this. Here's Hawk Rising, which was a Red Clover book a few years ago by the same author, about hawks living in more urban areas, and the famous pale male who even lived on an apartment building in New York City. But here is the attempt where people are starting to think about how animal territories and people territories cross and ways to support the two coexisting. So I think that this is a great place to launch those kinds of discussions as we are trying to coexist.
Thank you, Valerie. All right. I'm going to share next. I have two books that I'm going to share in a row here. First is this, and I wanted to begin with a land acknowledgement now. Because I'm speaking to you in Ndakina on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Abnaki people and the Wabanaki Dawnland Confederacy. And this book, Berry Song by Michaela Goad, with its focus on Native Tlingit culture from Southern Alaska, is a really great opportunity to talk with your students about land acknowledgements and why we would use them to acknowledge our complicated history with this land. This is also the second year in a row that I am sharing a book in our Red Clover conference that has song in the title. Last year I got to book talk A Song of Frutas. And I'm gonna perform the berry song for you guys because I like to do that, right? So I felt like this song lends itself to more of a chant than a song. So when we first encounter it early in the season, it goes like this. Salmonberry, cloudberry, blueberry, nagoonberry, huckleberry, soapberry, strawberry, crowberry. And that's just one way that you might sing this beautiful berry name song that Michaela Goad has written in her book. Berry Song as a story follows a young girl and her grandmother as they forage for food through the year on the southeast coast of Alaska, where Goad herself grew up and still lives today. The book really emphasizes the relationship between the land and the people, both in the words and in the pictures. The grandmother says, "We are part of the land," and the girl responds, "As the land is part of us." And the illustration depicts the girl growing plants for hair, wearing a dress made of the ocean, with branches growing from her fingertips and a bowl full of berries on her lap, of course. The book includes a warning at the beginning about not eating foraged foods without first really carefully identifying them, and also really ample end papers and back matter with detailed illustrations and photographs of different berries, as well as more information about the beliefs and the traditions that connect the Tlingit people to their land. In this back matter, Goad is also challenging her readers to actively participate in building up a deeper kinship with the land by speaking with it, taking care of it, and amplifying the Indigenous voices that are speaking up to protect it. I know that this book will be a fun read aloud, and it would be really interesting to challenge students to create their own sung version of the Berry Song. And it's a good connection with music, perhaps, to figure out a way to do that in a rhythmic or melodic way. It will also really inspire conversations about our students' relationships to the land that they live on and with. So it's great to engage with them about ways that they might speak with the land around them. You and your students could also learn about how Native people are actively working to protect our land today, and about how something that Goad recommends in the back matter, the different issues that Native communities are facing and how you can engage with them also. Unfortunately, red clover reading season doesn't overlap with berry season in Vermont, so you won't be able to go foraging with your students, but perhaps you squirreled away some berries from this summer. I picked like 20 pounds of blueberries in Goshen this year. You could explore berry cooking recipes with students or have them share family recipes while you're reading the book, or you could connect with the school cafeteria staff about having berries on the menu during Berry Song Week. Or maybe if you have a farm to school coordinator, they might be a good resource to bring in to expand the reach of this book as well. Finally, the book really lends itself well to art projects. So you could work with students to create watercolor paintings, because the watercolor illustrations are just like really beautiful in this book. Or you could even think about using berries themselves as paint. So that is Berry Song. I'm gonna roll right into my second book that I get to share with you, which is, my light is reflecting a little funny here, called Marshmallow Clouds, Two Poets at Play Among Figures of Speech. And it's been a little while, a few years, maybe since my first year on the committee, since we've had a real traditional poetry collection on the Red Clover list. And I'm really excited to share this delightful book with you guys today. It is structured around the four elements: fire, water, air, and earth. And it's made up of a collection of 28 poems. The two poets, Ted Kooser and Connie Wanick, bring a real playful joy to their language, exploring the world around us through figures of speech like metaphor, simile, and personification, among many others. If you want to go deep into figures of speech, this would be a great book to do it with. In the book, a pool of tadpoles become commas drawn by someone who's just learning to write, and a plate of marshmallows on a blue plate are just partly cloudy. A harpist playing their instrument is gently trying to control a giant moth. And an old barn combs its roof straight down the middle in the morning as it surveys the never-changing land around it. This book just like begs us to get our students writing their own poetry. I used it last spring with my fourth graders to introduce the idea of personification, and they wrote like the most delightful poems in which their school supplies were sharing their perspectives on their day-to-day lives and experiences. And all throughout the book, Richard Jones is the illustrator, and the illustrations do a really nice job of gently providing this concrete imagery for the like crazy creative ideas that are coming in the poems. In the first poem in the book, which is called Disappointment, Jones does like such a nice job presenting both the pie juggling clown tree and the squirrel nest that the poet's friend in the poem, the person who always sees things as they are, knows it to be. This first poem is actually a really great opportunity to ask our readers who they want to be, right? Do they want to be that joyful, creative dreamer who sees the fun in everything? Or do they want to be the person who sees things as they are? Because they're both valid and important ways to be in the world. It's also fun to read the poem without showing the illustrations, which is what I did when we were talking about personification with my students, and have them practice visualizing and playing the role of illustrator for the poems. On our committee website, we have a link to a really robust teacher's guide from the Center for Literacy and Primary Education, which has like so many ideas for teaching this book, including like a scripted set of lesson plans for teaching the whole book over 15 sessions. And as librarians, you know, we could pull from this resource in order to introduce the book or highlight specific poems for our students. Or you could share that resource with teachers, maybe in April, right? As they're all sort of scrambling for poetry resources, and be like, hey, we were exploring this Red Clover book and you could use it in your classroom now and really like expand on it in a wonderful way that would help kids, you know, engage with it more deeply. It's also, as a librarian, you might want to just slow down with this book and not try to like jam pack 28 poems into one session, but do it over a few sittings so that you can digest a few poems each time instead. In the end, our students are going to be inspired by this book to dig in their imagination and express a fresh perspective on the world around them. And I wanted to finish up just by reading my very favorite poem from this collection, which is called Fireplace. And in it, a fire is sort of portrayed as a family pet, more or less. It goes like this: Fireplace. We keep our fire safe in a playpen where we feed it, mostly leftovers from the woods. And fire is a good eater, tasting everything. It can grow quickly, gnawing on each new log, and then, like a happy wolf pup, it howls. It has no stomach, though, so fire is never full, never satisfied. And that's why, no matter how it begs, we must never set it free. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it on to Tessa, who's going to share 2 books next.
Hello. I have 2 for you today. I was expecting my picture to pop up, and it didn't for me, so I was confused. The first one I have is called Dragon Bones. It's one of our biographies, picture book biographies, and I love this story. It's written by Sarah Glenn Marsh and illustrated by Marcia Wicks. This is the story of Mary Anning, a young girl who lives on the English seacoast in the early 1800s. And Mary loves to go treasure hunting on the beach after a rainstorm comes. And she goes out with her father and her brother, and they go treasure hunting. And after the rain is the best time to do it. Together they find a variety of fossils, and Mary hopes to find the bones of a real dinosaur one day. Mary and her father clean the treasures they find, and they sell them to tourists at their family store. And here you can see the author or the illustrator starts using these kind of light white outline pictures to show you what she's imagining these fossils might have been back when they were alive. And I think that's a really cool use of the illustration to show that. Sadly, her father dies. Mary misses him a lot, of course, but she continues to fossil hunt with her brother and on her own. And again, here the illustrator uses that kind of white outline to show that her father is gone, but he's still kind of with her. Mary continues searching until she finally finds something that no one has seen before. She uncovers a skeleton. While her brother moves on to other things, Mary stays focused, and eventually she uncovers a full skeleton. And a collector purchases the skeleton and puts it in a museum and names it Ichthyosaur. So there's the skeleton, and then other way, there's what she imagines it looked like when it was alive. Mary keeps digging. She teaches herself about fossils and about biology, and I love this picture. Oh, I'm working with the camera because I love that tongue. I love how like dedicated she looks to dissecting this fish so that she can learn about skeletons and bones. And then she finds another full skeleton. And as before, this one is bought by a collector and put in a museum. The collector names it Plesiosaur. And he writes lots of publications about his new find, but he never once mentions Mary. Mary is not dissuaded. She opens her own store to sell her treasures, and she keeps finding treasures, keeps treasure hunting. She continues fossil hunting, discovering new skeletons and making history in the paleontology world, which I just love the illustrations here. And it shows that kids can really do cool things. Mary discovered her first fossil or her first skeleton when she was 13 years old. And I think kids in your libraries will absolutely love that. The story is easy to read with colorful comic style illustrations and has lots of back matter about Mary, about dinosaurs, about fossils, about paleontology, a bunch of different information. It has easy tie-ins with dinosaurs and geology, but it also presents the opportunity to talk about who owns and names such discoveries. And I thought this was fascinating. You can point out to the students that Mary was never given credit for any of her discoveries, at least not while she was alive. You can discuss who should get to name discoveries like this. Should it have been up to Mary? Was there justice in her doing the work and then them taking credit? I think kids will have strong opinions on that. My experience has shown kids usually have strong opinions on what's just. And you could ask them what they've named the skeleton. Another interesting conversation could be around the idea of fossil hunting now. Mary was doing her work in the early 1800s. You could ask kids, do you think there are still dinosaur fossils left to be found? Are there still people doing paleontology and finding more things? That could be an interesting research for the kids. I also recently found out, thanks to one of our committee members, that the tongue twister, She Sells Seashells, might have been based on Mary Anning and her story. So I thought that was neat, and that could be a fun tie-in with the kids. So in this beautiful picture book biography, you'll get to know Mary Anning, a fossil hunter who discovered a nearly intact dinosaur skeleton and forever changed the course of paleontology. So that's my first one. My second one is a total change of direction. This is fiction. It's called Abdul's Story by Jamila Tompkins Bigelow and illustrated by Tiffany Rose. Abdul is a confident young kid with stories to tell. And the illustrations in this book are so bright and colorful and just like, you just get happy looking at them. His imagination is overflowing, but his dyslexia and sloppy handwriting slow him down and cause lots of frustration. I like his frustrated face. Abdul struggles to write down his ideas. He writes and erases and writes and erases, and the letters don't come out right. The words are messy, his papers get smudged. Abdul finally decides that maybe his stories just are not meant to be written down. Until one day, they have an author come visit the classroom. Mr. Muhammad is a successful Black Muslim guest author who immediately impresses the students. He reads one of his own books, and then he encourages his kids to write their own stories. Abdul is inspired, but when he tries to write his own story, the same problems happen. Abdul, oops, missed the page. The same problems happen, the smudging, the erasing. He gets frustrated, and he slides under the desk. And then Mr. Muhammad notices Abdul's struggles. So he shares his own messy writer's notebook with Abdul. Ooh. I bet our author earlier would have had some messier notebooks that he didn't care to share with us, because the ones he shared with us looked pretty good. But I bet he had some scribbly, messy ones too. So he shares his own messy notebook with Abdul, and Mr. Muhammad encourages Abdul to put down the eraser and let his mistakes happen. So over the course of a few days, Abdul and his classmates work on a writing project with Mr. Muhammad. Abdul takes pride in writing a messy story, even though he does not have the best handwriting or perfect spelling, and he worries about that. When Mr. Muhammad chooses a story to read out loud at the end of the session, he chooses Abdul's story. And I love this because, like, oh man, because he just like feels like he could fly. He's so proud of himself that his story got chosen. And all of his classmates love it because they've always liked his stories. He's a great storyteller. And then I love the ending of the book. It says, some people are writers, and I am one of them. This is Abdul. And I love that because we talk so much about making mistakes in school, about the value of mistakes. Mistakes show that you're trying and you learn from your mistakes, take chances and make mistakes. I think kids hear it a lot, but it's often hard to internalize. So in this story, Abdul is able to connect with an adult who looks like him and has had similar experiences. And this allows Abdul to relax and ease into his own writing, mistakes and all. This is a great book to discuss perseverance, obviously, because he certainly has to persevere. Could also be an interesting discussion around the idea of what makes a good writer, because he has bad handwriting and he has bad spelling, but can you still be a good writer? Do you need to know how to spell? Do you need to have good handwriting? These are misconceptions that many kids and adults have, but Abdul's story can help bring those to light. It's a really beautiful Our Own Voices story as well. The author is Muslim, as are her main characters. I think their representation is definitely here in the story, but it's not their defining quality. It is not about them being Muslim, but it is in the story. And I think that Abdul finds inspiration in Mr. Muhammad that he might not have found in someone else who looked different. There's also a really great author read on YouTube. Tompkins Bigelow does a fantastic author read. I would highly recommend checking that out too. So for every kid who stared at a blank page, struggling to write, will connect with this representational, uplifting book with beautiful, colorful pictures too. All right, Hannah, back to you.
Thank you. All right, Leaf, you are up next to share Little Good Wolf.
With A Little Good Wolf. It's by Janet Stevens and Susan Stevens Crummell, the sisters team that we've seen before. It's been a while on the Clover list. And it's got the wolf making really good choices, all the things that we want kids to do, except his parents don't want him to do these things, so they send him to bad school. So while he's at bad school, there are very big lessons being taught by characters from different fairy tales, and he doesn't do very well there. But It's a fun way to learn about perspectives and how we can treat others, all sorts of things in this book. What I'm looking forward to a lot is talking about fractured fairy tales and different characters from different fairy tales, and then trying to find them in our library, whether I give them cards with call numbers with all the to the library, or if we do some searches online using the catalog. I might also do a simple crafting activity. The characters in the book a lot of times just have like a simple shirt on for the animals, and that reminded me a lot of what one of my colleagues does when she reads Creepy Underwear. She has the kids take paper and tape and make little clothing for their library stuffies. So I think that would be a lot of fun to do, and super simple. And once they start doing it, they usually then the next week, then they'll make more clothes for some other kind of story or different type of thing. I think it would also be fun to challenge kids to look for books that turn as you read them. So in this one, it does it 3 times. The first time being when you see one of the instructors, it's a giant. And so you really need all that space to show his body. Another time is when the Prince of Bull is expelling little Good Wolf from bad school. And the last time, which is the kind, tender moment, is when the family is reunited again and they're accepting little Good Wolf as he is because they love him. So as you're reading the book, another thing that can be a lot of fun to do, I think, is to talk about wolves and the science of wolves. There's a nice scene where they're looking for each other and howling. We have some nice videos on our website for howling wolves and why they do it, the different situations where they would do it. Also at the back, there's the magic apple that he chose not to eat. If he ate the apple, he would have turned good. Everything turns bad, everything bad turns good, and he made the decision to stay true to himself. But his friends find it, and so of course that could be a fun thing to write about, or at least talk about what might happen. Another fun thing in this book, to me, is that it features one of their other books inside it. So when he is reading to himself at bedtime, it's got the donkey egg in it. So another thing would be to look for books that have stuff like that in them, right? I forgot to show them before, but books that turn, ones that we're really familiar with, Melfeld from last year, Artemis Project, of course, oops, upside down, and The Great Fuzz Frenzy, which was one of their Red Clover books the first year I started at my current school. So there's lots of fun books to do all sorts of things with. And there is a little bit of important information to read in the back on the flap, because the author says that she really does try to be good. The illustrator says she felt kind of like a little bad wolf when she was growing up because she was the only one in the family that wanted to be an artist. And it also talks about the record that they used to listen to when they were little kids and how it was all about manners and how that inspired the book. So we could also get into technology, all sorts of things, old technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. All right, Abby Johnson is going to share Listen with us.
Okay. This is Listen, How Evelyn Glennie, a Deaf Girl, Changed Percussion. It's by Shannon Stalker, illustrated by Devin Halsworth. And it is about the first full-time professional solo percussionist in the world who also happens to be a woman who is deaf. It's an exploration of how we hear and the different ways that we can experience sound. In the back matter of the book, the author quotes Evelyn, who says that hearing is basically a specialized form of touch. Sound is simply vibrating air, which the ear picks up and converts to electrical signals, which are then interpreted by the brain. The sense of touch does this too. Evelyn was born into a musical family, and by the age of 10, she was an accomplished piano player and a clarinet player. And when she starts to have her hearing degenerate around age 10, the audiologist tells her that she will never play music again. And it didn't make sense to her. Why, if she could play music before she had this diagnosis, could she not play music after she was diagnosed with hearing loss? And her supportive family believed in her and that she could do what she wanted to do. And she attended traditional schools from then on. And a music teacher discovered that she had this innate musical ability and started giving her percussion lessons. Her first percussion lesson, he sent her home with a snare drum with no sticks. And she found all kinds of ways to make sound and vibration come from the snare drum. So you can start to see there's some really great STEM connections with this book and things that you could do in your classroom, and playing with drums and other things that vibrate. The second lesson, he has her play what she feels and take off her shoes and put her hands on the wall as he strikes a timpani. And this was the moment that really changes her life. And I'm going to read this page because it's just a great example of the onomatopoeia that goes through the whole book as well, and the beautiful swirling illustrations. It says, Evelyn's whole body resonated. Her belly, her back, her legs, her feet. She kicked off her shoes. Her heart raced. Whoom. Vibrations moved through her fingertips, her hand, her arm, then crossed her chest and tickled her other arm. Her heart answered. Wa-woom, wa-woom. She had found a sea of sound that belonged only to her. In that moment, every other sense intensified, as if Evelyn's whole body had become one giant ear. She goes on to study at the Royal Academy of Music in London after she convinces them that she should be allowed to audition based on her ability. And not only does she get in, but it changes the rules for music schools around the country. From that point on, they do not turn away anybody because of a disability. So she was already a trailblazer at age 16. And she goes on to launch a performing career, a recording career, and at this point, she's won 2 Grammys. She has been knighted Dame Evelyn by the Queen of England. She's opened the 2012 London Olympics by playing the bells of the allophone, and she's collaborated with artists, many famous artists. Your students may even recognize some of their names. Bjork, Bella Fleck, and Bobby McFerrin are a few of them. And she's released over 40 CDs. The book is just full of different entry points. It's, like I said, it has a lot of examples of onomatopoeia. So both for instrumental sounds and also like environmental sounds throughout the whole thing. The illustrations are swirling and bright and inviting, and could be a great invitation to illustrating music or sound. You can make instruments with your students out of everyday materials and explore how sounds come out of them, how sound travels, and where they feel it in their bodies. You could talk about what it means to truly listen with our eyes, our bodies, and our hearts. And one thing that's exciting about this particular biography is that it's about a living person. So you can go on her website and see videos of Evelyn playing all kinds of instruments. She has over 3,000 instruments in her website, has this huge archive of her playing all kinds of these instruments and objects. And she's still producing and creating and performing. And it's just a wonderful story, of course, about someone who's determined to do what they want to do, an amazing artist. And it talks about that she has this disability, but it's someone who is just exploring their abilities to the fullest. The end quote, I think, is just beautiful. She says, "Losing my hearing made me a better listener." So I just think that's a wonderful discussion point right there with your kids. And she's just a wonderful example. She's been helping the world to be better listeners. And that is like her mission in life. So wonderful opportunity to talk about listening and what it really means, and hearing and sound. That is listen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. All right, the last two books are going to be presented by Abby Adams.
Hi, so I have the last two books that are more for younger readers on the list. Obviously, when we choose books, we think about appropriateness in for the range that we're choosing, but these two will really resonate with your K2s. They are deceptively simple stories. The first is Luli and the Language of Tea, and it's by Andrea Wang, and the pictures are by Haewon Yum. And this is one of my favorite kinds of books where the storytelling goes end to end. It starts out with a nice little teaser of different teacups from all around the world. And then we see two classrooms, one labeled English as a Second Language, the other labeled Free Childcare. And there are grown-ups and kids getting sorted into both. We see Luli peeking through the door on the title page. And then there she is in the childcare classroom. And we find out that nobody else in this room speaks English, including Luli. But she's been thinking about how she can bring everybody together. And she brought supplies today. And so she sets up tea time. And then she calls in Mandarin Chinese to the rest of the students, or the rest of the kids. She says, cha. And all around the room, heads pop up. And these children, who are from many different cultures, respond in their own language with words that are really similar. And Andrea Wang does a really nice job of giving us the phonetic pronunciations for all the words as we go. The names have phonetic pronunciations in the back matter, but we'll get there. So everybody around the room recognizes that word, and they all join her at the table. And then there's this beautiful little spread where she's pouring the tea and passing the cup and passing the cup and passing the cup. You see a lovely aerial view of everyone, but Luli discovers that the teapot is empty and so is her cup. So her cup is passed and passed and passed, and everyone gives her a little bit of theirs. And at the end, she shares her new favorite English word, which is cookie. And now, instead of the classroom being full of isolated children, they're all laughing and enjoying the tea together. Luli's teapot was empty, but her heart was full. And I'll get to the back matter in a minute, but at its heart, this is a story about immigration and the amazing things that happen in America when people from different countries come together. This book reminds me of other classic texts about common international foods, like Everybody Cooks Rice by Nora Dooley, which is from 1991. And it was part of a series, and it might be lurking somewhere in your collection. In the back matter, we have beautiful maps that include numbers of immigrants from all of the different continents that the children in the story represent. So for example, Asia in 2019, there were more than 14 million Asian immigrants living in the USA. It also includes descriptions of how tea is enjoyed in all of these different countries around the world. And because this book is written so simply, it's a great starting point for first conversations about immigration and international diversity. Older students might love to see some of the information that we have included on our website. There's a map and a discussion about how if a culture first received tea, which of course originated in Asia, by land, then they call it some variation of cha. But if they received it by sea, they're much more likely to call it some variation of tea. So it's like a little bit of linguistic, it's an interesting linguistic thing. There's also some videos that explain that difference and talk about in other cultures where they have maybe a different word, it's because they have a native plant that grows there. It's a deceptively simple book, and there's other jumping off points too to talk about international trade or historic trade, language similarities and differences. And I hope that you'll enjoy Luli and the Language of Tea. I know that a local librarian in my area partnered with a local tea shop to do a tasting for students, and that would be a wonderful way to introduce tea to kids who maybe are not familiar with it as a beverage. And the last book of our list is The Pet Potato by Josh Lacey. It's illustrated digitally by Momoko Abe, and it is about a kid who has a very common desire, and that is he would like nothing more than a pet. So the end papers show him very lonely and sad, looking at an empty fish bowl and an empty bird cage, a little foreshadowing for what's going to happen. He's drawing pictures of all kinds of pets, and he's suggesting to his parents that, you know, all the different kinds of pets he could get, and they tell him, no, we're too busy, we're allergic. So one day his dad hands him a present, and it's a small package tied in blue paper. It's a potato. And his dad says it's a pet potato. And my favorite line of the book is right here. Dad made jokes like that all the time. Albert had learned to ignore them. Many of our kids live in families where this kind of teasing is really common. And maybe you don't have the same sense of humor as your grown-ups. I feel like it's very relatable. So even though he didn't want it, he suddenly realizes that the potato looks lonely. And so he decides to try it out as a pet. And next we have these beautiful, fanciful illustrations of him doing all kinds of things. I love this picture in the bath where the potato is wearing one of these hats that keep the water away from the baby's eyes. He sleeps next to the potato. But of course, because it's a potato, it goes moldy and mom dumps it into the compost. But our little protagonist grieves very deeply for this potato. His parents decide that he's responsible enough to get a hamster, but he doesn't want a hamster. He wants his potato back. And then in this great spread, we see the potato plant sprouting and Albert digging them up and sharing pet potatoes with everyone. And in the final end papers, we see everybody playing with their pet potatoes. And this is one of those books that has a different color underneath, cover underneath. I would share it at the end because it does foreshadow the potato. There he is in the train. So another simple book that can be a great jumping off point for talking about very relatable topics, particularly for early elementary school: pets, family jokes, teasing, loss, even composting and gardening, and of course, companionship. It's a lovely inclusion with the Red Clover Classic Potato Pants and Sophie's Squash, which is a very similar story that was on the Red Clover list several years ago. I love how this version of this tale is updated with a lovely multicultural family and some and an inclusive neighborhood at the end as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abby. Okay, we're going to transition to very briefly, like 1 minute or less, talking about some of our favorite books from our B list, the ones that almost made it because as committee members, we all, keep track of our favorites and we have a process where we nominate our top 10, and then we have this epic meeting where we have to narrow it down, and there's always those books that get away, and some of us haven't quite gotten over some of them, so we need a chance to talk about them. So here's our moment. So the one that I wanted to share, I'm going to start off, is Jarrett and Jerome Pumphrey's Somewhere in the Bayou, and this is a book for those students that have a dark sense of humor, because most of these characters don't make it through the story. And it's also a really, really wonderful book for when you need to emphasize the importance of looking beyond the first impression that you have of something. This book will help you start that conversation with your students. So Tessa, you're gonna very briefly talk about Mina.
All right, I have Mina. Mina is a mouse and her mouse family, and she's got a dad who does quirky, weird things, as we talked about in the Pet Potato book too. One day her dad brings home a pet squirrel, and Mina spends the whole book trying to convince her dad that that is not in fact a squirrel. And her dad says, no, it's fine. And so this is just fun illustrations, but also it's fantastic for kids who like to know more than the grown-ups do. And dad's a little bit, goofy, but the kids know more than the grown-ups, and the kids that you're reading it to will love knowing what's going on, even though the grown-ups do not.
Thank you. Leaf, you had 2 to share with us. Something went wrong with your audio. We lost you.
you're muted.
We had it and then it went away.
Story of the day. Okay, so Books Aren't for Eating is a goat, owns a bookshop, and even more than reading books, he enjoys connecting books with the readers that will actually appreciate them. He gets his most difficult customer in another goat who starts eating the books. So his defining moment, the crowning moment, is when he goes from eating the books to finding the one, remembering how he was once, because his wife reminded him, of course, because that's what wives do, right? And then he found that book and was able to get him to connect to it. So I used this with my second graders, and they thought it was hilarious, especially because the main character's name is Leopold, and that's our music teacher's name. But the whole idea about book care. So it's fun, it's light, but it's also about taking good care of books. So it's a great beginning of the year book. The other book I wanted to share is Every Dog in the Neighborhood. In this book, you would be inspired to talk about letter writing with your students. They go around, the main character and his grandmother go around and basically survey the neighborhood of how many dogs they have, what their names are, things like that. They realize that they really need a dog park, and grandma takes it upon herself to make it happen. So this would be a fun book just to read, but also perhaps to inspire some surveys or to inspire some letter writing or identifying a problem that you want to try to solve. Thank you.
All right, Abby Adams. You gotta unmute.
Thank you. It's trying to be fast. The first one I have to share is called When the Sky Glows. It is a nonfiction book, but it's unusual because it is a conceptual nonfiction book rather than about a specific topic. So the concept here is that the sky changes, and it changes with light. And there's 2 lines of text throughout the book. There's kind of this spare, when morning comes, the sky glows. And then there is more details about each of those phenomenon, like sunrise. It's gorgeous, beautiful digital illustrations that are just stunning, and I think will be a really nice addition in your library. And then the second one is called Up Your Nose. It has a provocative title, just like I Eat Poop, which is part of the reason why it's not on the list this year. But it is a wonderful book about the world of germs all around and inside you, with the frame of why you shouldn't pick your nose and maybe why adults tell you to do certain things. It has full of science fact, talks about the 5 different kinds of germs: bacteria, viruses, protozoa, fungi, and helminths. And it also talks about the immune system in a way that is really easy for kids to understand. My favorite illustration about that is right here, with the skin protecting your body and your tears and your mucus, and then the different kinds of immune cells that scan and identify and track and destroy different germs that come into your body that aren't supposed to be there. So I encourage you to include Up Your Nose in your collection. Thanks.
Thank you, Abby. Joyce is gonna share the next one with us.
Magic. I don't have the book in front of me, by Mirella Ortega. It's a beautiful book that is illustrated by the author, expressing her love for family and the sense of magic that occurs on this pineapple farm. It's taking place in Veracruz, Mexico, and it has the feeling of like a Disney animation illustrated book. And in fact, the author illustrator is an animator. So I highly recommend Magic by Mirella Ortega.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I have time for this last one, which I didn't anticipate that I would, but this is like the weirdest, maybe the second weirdest book that we evaluated, but it was the only one that ended up like in our nomination discussion. It's called If You Cry Like a Fountain. And it's a book that's kind of about this little earthworm that can't stop crying, but also about like how amazing crying can be. And you know, in that like you could use your tears to clean and mop the floor and it will be shining if you just keep crying everywhere. Or like you could get your toothbrush wet, or you know, put out the candles on your birthday cake. It is just like extraordinarily strange, but also like so wonderful. And the like personal connection, like a close family relative of mine died this year, and it was right around when we were talking about this book, and I like shared it with cousins who were, you know, very, very sad, and it just was able to bring like a little bit of levity to the fact that we were just all crying all the time and couldn't stop. And I feel like it's an important book for that, right? It's just so weird and wonderful, and there's not many books that talk about like how people just need to cry all the time sometimes. So there's that one. It's a real weird one. But we have just a last minute or two if anybody had a question for the committee, or we could wrap up and send you all off to dinner. This is me practicing wait time as a teacher.
Hannah, can I just hop in while people are maybe
go for it.
emailing?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to remind everyone that when you put ideas out on the listserv, like on the we will take those ideas and then put them onto the Red Clover website so that they are curated for you. Because collectively we have so much wisdom and we have so many great creative ideas for how to present these books. So we're taking care of that for you. The Red Clover website is linked through our committee website is linked through the Department of Libraries website. And we all encourage you to check it out because we worked real hard on it. And,
and if you scroll back in the chat, you'll see it there too.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Tessa.
And a major shout out to Tessa, who is our web mistress and does all of it for us and is amazing. So
yeah, seriously, thank you, Tessa, so much. All right. Thank you everyone so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. And I hope that you enjoyed hearing us talk about these books that we love so much. Yeah, we really appreciate you all. Thank you.
Great job, everyone.
All right.
Awesome job.
Yeah.